When you look at the palm of your hand, you'll notice the first prominent line, often called the headline. But for us, it's not just a line, it's a symbol. It represents your mind, the way you think, and how you perceive the world. It's the blueprint of your destiny because every single thing, begins in the mind. Before anything manifests outside, it is born inside. A house starts as an idea, a career, a relationship, a masterpiece, even a failure. They are all first sketches in the mind. That first line is not just a crease on your skin. It's a mirror of your inner dialogue. And that dialogue can either build you or break you. Most people underestimate how loud their thoughts are. Even when you're sitting quietly, not speaking a word, your thoughts are talking. They're judging, fearing, comparing, hoping, planning, doubting, and they're not neutral. The quality of those thoughts slowly becomes the quality of your reality. The line in your hand doesn't define whether you're intelligent or not. That's far too shallow. It reflects how you use your mind. Is it chaotic or calm, focused or fragmented, heavy with assumptions or light with awareness? That line begins to change, subtly, gradually, based on how consistently you sharpen your mental sword. You can look at two people with similar talents and similar circumstances, and still, they will live very different lives. Why? Because one of them learned to train the mind like a disciplined warrior, and the other let the mind wander like a distracted child. Your destiny is not hidden in some faraway mystery. It's being written every day by the quality of your attention. A scattered mind cannot build a solid life. If your thinking is always reactive, always pulled by noise and opinions, how can you hear your own voice? How can you see clearly? The world we live in is full of distractions. Everywhere you turn, something wants your attention. But not everything deserves it. If you allow your mind to be shaped by the noise around you, your inner world becomes just an echo chamber. No clarity, no vision, just borrowed thoughts recycled again and again. But when you become still, truly still, you start to recognize which thoughts are yours and which were given to you. That's when something shifts. You stop reacting. You start responding. And that small difference opens the door to a completely different life. Now here's something most people never realize: your mind is not fixed. It's plastic. It can be shaped, molded, rewired. But it takes effort, discipline, intention. Meditation is not a trend, it's a tool. Journaling isn't just writing, it's organizing your thoughts. Reading is not just about learning facts, it's feeding the mind with depth. Every one of these practices sharpens that inner blueprint. They make the lines stronger, not on your hand, but in your life. And over time, even the line in your palm responds. That's how deep the connection runs between your inner and outer world. Some people say, "I was just born with this kind of thinking." No, you were not born with it. You practiced it, perhaps unknowingly. You repeated certain thoughts for so long they became beliefs. But just as you built those patterns, you can break them. A confused mind will always lead to a confusing life, but a clear, quiet mind, now that's dangerous in the best way possible. It doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means you're not easily shaken anymore. You think deeply, choose wisely, and act deliberately. That's how the first line becomes a path, not just a mark on your skin, but a direction for your journey. If you want to understand where your life is headed, first understand what your mind is doing right now. What stories are you telling yourself? What are you clinging to? What are you afraid of? What do you believe is possible? Because all of that is being imprinted not just in your hand, but in your actions, your habits, your energy. Change the story in your mind, and you change the rhythm of your life. It always starts there. It always starts within. So don't chase after signs from the outside. Look at that first line, yes, but more importantly, look at what it reflects. Sharpen your thinking. Take responsibility for your inner world, because when the blueprint is clear, the path begins to reveal itself. If the first line reflects the mind, then the second line in your hand speaks for the heart. And not just in the romantic sense that people often assume. It speaks for your capacity to feel, to connect, to endure, to rise after you fall. This line isn't about how emotional you are. It's about emotional strength. It tells the story of how deeply you experience life and how you carry those experiences inside you. Because life is not just about what happens. It's about how you respond to what happens. And that response is always born in the heart. You can have the sharpest mind, the most logical thoughts, the clearest plans. But if your heart is closed off, if your emotions are constantly dragging you into doubt, fear, bitterness, or anger, then those plans will never take root. The heart gives direction its depth. It gives your actions their soul. It brings warmth to your journey. And more than that, it gives you the ability to keep going, especially when the path becomes difficult. That's the true test. Not how perfectly you perform when everything is easy, but how you move forward when you're carrying weight inside. We all carry something. Pain, loss, disappointment, betrayal. These are not unusual. Everyone, in some form, has felt them. But some allow these experiences to harden their heart. They close themselves off. They become cold, guarded, numb. And some, those rare few, let the pain refine them. They don't run from it. They feel it deeply. They let it teach them. They come out softer, but stronger. That is what this second line reflects. Not how many times you've been broken, but how many times you've stayed open. You can't grow without allowing yourself to feel. Emotional avoidance is emotional stagnation, but when you allow your heart to breathe, to fully experience what life brings, you create resilience. Not the kind that suppresses emotion, but the kind that transforms it. You stop seeing emotion as weakness. You see it as fuel. And when you live with that kind of heart, you no longer fear vulnerability. You no longer fear connection. You realize that love, gratitude, and compassion are not luxuries, they're necessities. They are what keep the journey human. Now, we live in a world that rewards emotional distance. People are told to stay strong by numbing themselves, to appear calm by suppressing what they feel. But that's not strength, that's armor. And armor becomes heavy. It disconnects you from yourself and eventually from others. Real strength is when you can sit with your emotion and still act with clarity. When your heart is wide open, but your actions are steady. That's the balance. And it doesn't happen by accident. It happens through awareness. If your second line feels weak, it means life is asking you to reconnect, to soften where you've become rigid, not to break open, but to melt. To remember the warmth that made you curious, kind, and alive before the world taught you to shut it down. Because once the heart is active, the whole system changes. You begin to see people differently. You listen better. You stop reacting out of old wounds. You pause before speaking. You become less consumed with proving and more committed to understanding. This isn't about becoming emotional. It's about becoming emotionally awake. And here's something else: your emotions are not the enemy, they're messengers. When you feel anxious, your heart is calling for alignment. When you feel sad, it's asking for rest or release. When you feel joy, it's pointing to what matters. If you ignore these signals, you live out of sync. But if you listen, really listen, then your life begins to take shape from the inside out. That second line becomes more than a symbol. It becomes a reminder that no matter how intelligent or skilled you are, your life will feel empty if your heart is asleep. When we talk about destiny, people often imagine something grand and far off. But the truth is, it's shaped every day in how we choose to feel and how we allow others to feel around us. A kind word, a patient gesture, a forgiving choice. These are not small things. They create waves. They build character. They echo. And they always come from the heart. So if you're searching for direction, look there first. Strengthen that center. Let it guide you forward with courage and softness. Because when your heart is alive, your path becomes alive too. If the first line reflects the mind, then the second line in your hand speaks for the heart. And not just in the romantic sense that people often assume. It speaks for your capacity to feel, to connect, to endure, to rise after you fall. This line isn't about how emotional you are. It's about emotional strength. It tells the story of how deeply you experience life and how you carry those experiences inside you. Because life is not just about what happens, it's about how you respond to what happens. And that response is always born in the heart. You can have the sharpest mind, the most logical thoughts, the clearest plans. But if your heart is closed off, if your emotions are constantly dragging you into doubt, fear, bitterness, or anger, then those plans will never take root. The heart gives direction its depth. It gives your actions their soul. It brings warmth to your journey. And more than that, it gives you the ability to keep going, especially when the path becomes difficult. That's the true test. Not how perfectly you perform when everything is easy, but how you move forward when you're carrying weight inside. We all carry something. Pain, loss, disappointment, betrayal. These are not unusual. Everyone in some form has felt them, but some allow these experiences to harden their heart. They close themselves off. They become cold, guarded, numb, and some, those rare few, let the pain refine them. They don't run from it. They feel it deeply. They let it teach them. They come out softer but stronger. That is what this second line reflects. Not how many times you've been broken, but how many times you've stayed open. You can't grow without allowing yourself to feel. Emotional avoidance is emotional stagnation. But when you allow your heart to breathe, to fully experience what life brings, you create resilience. Not the kind that suppresses emotion, but the kind that transforms it. You stop seeing emotion as weakness. You see it as fuel. And when you live with that kind of heart, you no longer fear vulnerability. You no longer fear connection. You realize that love, gratitude, and compassion are not luxuries. They're necessities. They are what keep the journey human. Now, we live in a world that rewards emotional distance. People are told to stay strong by numbing themselves, to appear calm by suppressing what they feel. But that's not strength, that's armor. And armor becomes heavy. It disconnects you from yourself, and eventually, from others. Real strength is when you can sit with your emotion and still act with clarity. When your heart is wide open, but your actions are steady. That's the balance. And it doesn't happen by accident. It happens through awareness. If your second line feels weak, it means life is asking you to reconnect, to soften where you've become rigid. Not to break open, but to melt. To remember the warmth that made you curious, kind, and alive before the world taught you to shut it down. Because once the heart is active, the whole system changes. You begin to see people differently. You listen better. You stop reacting out of old wounds. You pause before speaking. You become less consumed with proving and more committed to understanding. This isn't about becoming emotional. It's about becoming emotionally awake. And here's something else: your emotions are not the enemy. They're messengers. When you feel anxious, your heart is calling for alignment. When you feel sad, it's asking for rest or release. When you feel joy, it's pointing to what matters. If you ignore these signals, you live out of sync. But if you listen, really listen, then your life begins to take shape from the inside out. That second line becomes more than a symbol. It becomes a reminder that no matter how intelligent or skilled you are, your life will feel empty if your heart is asleep. When we talk about destiny, people often imagine something grand and far off. But the truth is, it's shaped every day in how we choose to feel and how we allow others to feel around us. A kind word, a patient gesture, a forgiving choice. These are not small things. They create waves. They build character. They echo. And they always come from the heart. So if you're searching for direction, look there first. Strengthen that center. Let it guide you forward with courage and softness. Because when your heart is alive, your path becomes alive too. There's a third line in your hand, and it doesn't lie. It tells the story of what you do. Not what you hope for, not what you dream about, not what you tell others you're going to start next Monday, but what you actually move toward with consistency. This line represents action. The small steps you take, the habits you build, the discipline you hold when no one's watching. And it might be the most honest line of all, Because while the mind can imagine and the heart can feel, it's your actions that turn those inner forces into reality. That's where destiny stops being a theory and starts being something you touch with your own hands. People love the idea of potential. They wear it like a badge. I could do this. I might become that. But potential means nothing without motion. Action is the bridge between the invisible and the visible. You can have clarity in your mind and fire in your heart, but if you're still sitting still, waiting, doubting, overthinking, then you stay stuck. The line of action doesn't reward who you could be. It reflects who you're becoming through the things you repeatedly do. Now, here's what most people don't want to hear. You become your routines. Not your goals, not your wishes. Your routines. Show me what you do with your mornings, and I'll show you your future. Show me how you respond when you feel lazy or unmotivated, and I'll show you what kind of strength you've cultivated. Because it's easy to act when you're inspired. It's easy to move when everything is aligned. But that's not the test. The real test is whether you move when it's hard, whether you show up when no one claps, whether you stay committed when the excitement fades. We live in a world that celebrates results, but it's the process that builds you. That line on your hand reflects repetition. It reflects how willing you are to do boring, uncomfortable, necessary things over and over until they become part of your identity. Destiny doesn't come from one big moment. It comes from 1,000 small choices. Waking up early, training your body, studying deeply, practicing silence, finishing what you start. It's carved in sweat, patience, and persistence. And this carving doesn't happen once. It happens daily. Sometimes we overcomplicate change. We wait for the perfect plan, the ideal time, the right mood. But change is not complicated. It's just uncomfortable. That's why people avoid it. They wait until they feel ready. But action doesn't wait for emotion. You act first and the emotion follows. You commit, then you adapt. You move even with fear, even with doubt. And that movement is what opens doors. Action always precedes clarity. You don't think your way into a new life. You behave your way there. Now, people might say, but I don't know what the right step is. And that's okay. Most of the time you won't. But that's no excuse for staying still. Take a step, any step. Let movement guide you. Let failure teach you. Let consistency reshape you. The only wrong step is no step. The only guaranteed failure is refusing to try. The line of action doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. It asks, what are you doing today? Not next week. Not someday. Today. That's where the power is. And yes, action alone is not enough. It must be aligned. That's why the first two lines matter. The mind gives you direction. The heart gives you fuel. But this third line, this is the engine. This is the grip you apply to the wheel. This is where you stop waiting for the perfect moment and start becoming the kind of person who builds moments, who doesn't wait for life to hand them purpose, but carves it through effort. There's no shortcut. You want transformation, then act like the person you're trying to become, every day, without excuse, without applause. And over time, the actions you take begin to define you. They become part of your energy. People can feel it. You start walking differently, not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you know who you are. You've earned it, in silence, in effort, in the parts of the day where nobody sees what you're doing. That's the kind of power that lasts. It doesn't fade when the mood fades. It's real, it's earned. So when you look at that third line in your hand, don't ask what it means. Ask what it's reminding you to do. Ask how your actions today are shaping your tomorrow. Because at the end of it all, you're not remembered for what you intended to do. You're remembered for what you did. Most people, when they look at the palm of their hand, only see the lines. They focus on the three main ones, trying to find meaning, predict the future, or seek validation. But very few ever look in between. Very few pause and ask, what lives in the space between these lines? Because that space, empty as it may seem, is where your life actually unfolds. The mind, The heart and your actions, they don't operate in isolation. They influence each other constantly. And that interaction, that invisible dance happening between the three, is what truly decides the direction of your life. You can't think clearly if your emotions are in chaos. You can't act consistently if your thoughts are scattered. You can't love deeply if your actions don't reflect care. Everything is connected. So while the lines are useful symbols, it's the space between them that matters most. That's the territory of awareness. That's the place where you either live on autopilot or step into conscious alignment. That's where most people get lost. Not because they don't have intelligence or passion or discipline, but because they've never learned how to align them. And if they're not aligned, they pull you in different directions. Your mind says one thing, your heart feels another, and your body does something else entirely. That's fragmentation. That's how energy gets drained, focus gets lost, and years slip away. But when those forces begin to communicate, when your thinking becomes clear, your emotions remain steady, and your actions follow purpose, then you enter a different rhythm. Life stops being a struggle. It becomes a flow. And that flow is not accidental. It's cultivated through attention. When you become aware of the space between your thoughts, you stop reacting impulsively. When you hold space between feeling and action, you don't explode, you respond. When you pause between a plan and a decision, you stop chasing noise and start moving with clarity. That space is powerful. It's where wisdom lives. Not the kind you read about, but the kind you experience. And here's the strange truth. That space is always available, but we rarely enter it. Why? Because we rush, we react. We fill silence with noise. We avoid stillness because we're afraid of what might rise. But that's the problem. Silence is not empty. It's full of truth. That quiet space between the mind, heart, and body. That's your internal compass. It tells you when you're off track. It reminds you to slow down. It invites you to realign. So often we think clarity will come from doing more, achieving more, pushing harder. But sometimes clarity comes from less distraction, less reactivity, less probing, and more listening, more stillness, more integration. Because real strength is not just in how fast you can move, but in how still you can remain when everything around you pulls for your attention. When people say, "I feel lost," what they really mean is, "I've lost the connection between my inner world and my outer life." And the solution is not out there. It's in the space in between. Ask yourself, do my thoughts serve my values? Do my emotions support my growth? Do my actions reflect what I truly care about? These questions live in that space. And when you begin to answer them honestly, something shifts. You stop chasing approval. You stop following the crowd. You begin to trust your own rhythm. You become internally guided instead of externally pulled. And when that happens, life starts to feel different. Even in the middle of chaos, you remain anchored. Even when things don't go your way, you don't collapse. You adjust, you breathe, you move forward, not from panic, but from presence. That presence is everything. It's not loud, but it's powerful. And the more time you spend in that space, between thought and action, between emotion and reaction, the more mastery you develop. That's where the lines on your hand become more than symbols. They become instruments. Your mind sharpens your vision. Your heart deepens your connection. Your actions carry intention. And together, they form something rare, alignment. That's when destiny stops being something you wait for. It becomes something you live, one choice at a time from the inside out. Because the space between the lines is not empty, it's sacred. That's where the real you is found. People love the idea of fate. There's something comforting about believing that our life is already written somewhere, that the lines on our hands are a map, carved by forces beyond our control. And so we look at these lines like they hold some ancient secret, as if they know what will happen, when it will happen, and who will become. But here's what most people never realize: the lines in your hand don't predict your life. They reflect it. They shift as you shift. They respond to the way you think, the way you feel, and most importantly, the way you live. That's not superstition, that's truth. You are not a passenger of destiny. You are the sculptor of it. We've been told to accept what we're given, to believe that what's meant to be will be. But that idea has one fatal flaw. It assumes you are powerless. It tells you that your choices don't matter, that your pain is random, and that your effort is just noise against the wind. And that belief, that's what holds most people back. It's not their lack of talent, not their environment, not their struggle. It's the story they've chosen to believe about what's possible. Let's be honest, it's easier to blame fate than to take responsibility. It's easier to say, "This is just how I am," than to ask, "What needs to change?" But the moment you take full ownership, when you stop waiting for signs and start creating your own path, that's when things begin to shift. You stop playing small, you stop outsourcing your future to chance, and you begin to realize that every decision you make is a brushstroke on the canvas of your life. What you believe has power, not because beliefs are magical, but because they shape your perception, and your perception shapes your behavior. If you believe you're stuck, you act stuck. If you believe life is unfair, you look for proof of that unfairness. If you believe you're destined for growth, for strength, for something meaningful, you begin to walk differently, speak differently, think differently. That internal shift creates an external ripple. The lines in your hand don't make your life. They mirror the direction your energy is flowing. So when you look at those lines, don't ask, "What do they say about me?" Ask, "What do I want them to say in 5 years?" That's a very different question, because it puts the power back in your hands, literally and figuratively. It forces you to stop treating destiny like a lottery and start treating it like a commitment, a choice, a responsibility. You've probably met people who carry this quiet strength. They're not loud. They're not chasing attention. But when they walk into a room, something shifts. It's not because they're lucky. It's because they live with intention. They've made choices, hard ones, often unseen, to become who they are, and their life reflects those choices. Not fate, not chance, a choice. Of course, not everything is in your control. Life will throw you into storms you didn't ask for. People will leave, plans will break, pain will visit. But even in those moments, especially in those moments, you still have power. You can decide what story to tell yourself. You can decide how to respond, how to grow, and how to carry yourself forward. And in doing so, you shift the entire trajectory of your life. That's not ignoring fate. That's working with it, dancing with it, bending it. And it's in that dance that you begin to understand. The illusion isn't that you have no control. The illusion is that you ever needed permission to take control. You were never waiting for the lines to reveal your path. You were waiting for yourself to wake up, to take the pen, and to write the next chapter with your own hand. The lines are only the echo of what you've done with your time here, and that echo can be rewritten. Every moment you choose awareness over autopilot, growth over comfort, courage over fear, you change the imprint. So don't look at your palm searching for what's already been decided. Look there and remember, these lines don't define you, you define them. If the lines on your hand are reflections of your mind, your heart and your actions, then the most important question isn't what they say, it's how you're going to shape them moving forward. Because no matter what you've lived through, no matter how deep the patterns have been etched into your life, you're never trapped. You're not bound to stay the same. You don't have to be who you were yesterday, or who the world expects you to be today. You can begin again, at any moment, by deciding to take full responsibility for the life you want to create. The lines may be there, but your steps carve the path. We're not talking about overnight change. That's a fantasy. Real change doesn't come in loud declarations. It comes in the quiet repetition of new behavior. It comes from showing up differently. It comes from becoming more mindful of what you consume, how you speak, where your attention flows. and who you allow into your space. This is how you begin to carve a new life, one choice at a time. And these choices aren't always dramatic. In fact, the small ones matter most. Getting up early to train, sitting in silence instead of scrolling, choosing to forgive instead of holding on, saying no to things that drain you, even if they once defined you. These are the moves that shift your direction. But that's the hard part, staying consistent when no one sees it. Because most people live performative lives. They do what looks good, what sounds good, what wins approval. But what's rare is someone who lives aligned from within. Someone who's willing to practice discipline, even when it's not celebrated. Someone who takes ownership of their energy, day after day, without waiting for motivation to strike. That kind of person doesn't need to chase destiny. They've become it. Still, it's not about perfection. You'll fall. You'll mess up. You'll have moments where the old patterns return, where the doubt creeps in, where your energy slips. That's okay. The path doesn't demand flawlessness. It demands awareness. If you fall, get up. If you get lost, return. The difference between drifting through life and carving it with purpose isn't about never getting lost. It's about noticing when you do and having the courage to come back. Sometimes people ask, how do I know what step to take? But the truth is, you already know. Deep down, the mind knows what it needs to let go of. The heart knows what it's been avoiding. The body knows when it's been neglected. The only thing that gets in the way is noise. Too many opinions, too much comparison, too much thinking without moving. But when you quiet the noise and return to yourself, the next step becomes clear. And then it's no longer about waiting, it's about moving with trust. If your mind is full of clutter, you sharpen it with practice. You read, you write, you sit in silence. If your heart is tired, you heal it with patience. You rest, you forgive, you learn to open again. And if your actions are scattered, you anchor them in discipline. You create systems. You stay consistent, even when the results are slow. That's how the pieces begin to align. And once they do, the lines on your hand aren't just marks anymore. They become symbols of intention, reflection, and growth. They begin to tell a new story, one that you're actively writing. It's easy to talk about change. It's harder to live it. But the moment you stop romanticizing the idea of transformation and start doing the gritty work, when you show up on the days you don't feel like it, when you speak with integrity even when it's uncomfortable, when you choose the harder right over the easier wrong, that's when the shift becomes real. That's when your life starts echoing a new frequency. So don't wait for the lines to guide you. Don't sit back hoping the future will reveal itself. Instead, move with awareness, move with intention. Trust that each aligned step you take leaves a mark, not just on your journey, but within you. The lines may be there, yes, but the way forward has always been in your hands.